Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Paranormal Karen. First of all, no podcast next week, Thanksgiving. No podcast Thanksgiving, but join the Patreon. Or I forget what my promo. Join the Patreon, find a show, join my email list, stay tuned, all that stuff. karenrontowski.com, psychicstandup.com. Like and share or whatever is supposed to happen. You know, today my guest, Darcy, you have not been on my show in probably 3 years, have you?
I think it has been 3 years. I was looking back through some old correspondence and I was like, oh, it's been a while.
It had. Well, you know, I moved out of California to take care of my folks. I'll be back. Today it looks like San Diego. Sometimes it looks like LA. Sometimes I don't know. But I love your Twitter, and I was watching your some of the stuff you have coming up, but we're going to get to that. But first of all, you are a writer, an academic, a performer, and a paranormal enthusiast and investigator, and you host the Mysteries Decoded podcast, which I actually want to start with that. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
I usually start with people's backgrounds, but for some reason, all of a sudden, I'm just like, they're on my show. Trust me. Let's get into it. Well,
So the Mysteries Decoded podcast is a season of a podcast that I had the I was fortunate enough to host and write and produce for the CW about a year ago. And I did 8 episodes for them. And we talk about all things strange and paranormal. And it's a companion piece to their show that's also at the same name, Mysteries Decoded. And so we had on some returning guests from the TV show, but then also new guests that I brought in and some folks that if people are familiar with our paranormal people out there, they would be very excited. Like I had John E. L. Tenney on for an episode, Ryan Sprague, Greg and Dana Newkirk were on an episode, just like different folks coming on to talk about things. But I also brought on some different folks like Doctria, that's words just stopped this today. Dr. Andrea Kidda, who's an amazing folklorist, came on. Dr. Adam Golub came on to talk about Bigfoot and contemporary culture. And so my paranormal world and my academic world are always working in tandem because I think through my formalized training in the world of academia, I'm always looking at the paranormal through a few different lenses. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to bring the fun pop culture and investigative side to the podcast, but also the academic side as well.
And you really are an academic. I really feel like words don't mean very much lately, but I really feel like you are not only an academic, but you do bring that to the paranormal. In fact, right before you said it, it was going to come out of my mouth. Like you really have that inquisitive, smart, curious mind that is looking into this. And first of all, I love folklore, and there's always that thread in it of, do you know what I mean? Is this true or not? But I'm going to say this. I love how you do things because I think skeptic has become a bad word. And I feel like a skeptic is a closed-minded attack. And I think you are a believer who can be skeptical. How's that sound?
I think that is a really good way to put it because as our friend Ryan Sprague, too many Ryans, as our friend Ryan Singer says, it's more fun to believe, right? And so I love, at a baseline, I love the whimsy that comes along with paranormal belief, investigation, being excited about it. I love whimsy, and I think people don't have enough whimsy in their lives in general. People get so serious. But I also think that it's important to critically think about things. I know critical thinking in today's world is not always great, not always valued. But for me, it's really important because my brain has always been that kind of different take on things. And so it always makes connections that maybe not everyone is seeing. I don't want to say that no one is seeing, because that I would be such an outlier. I'm somewhat of an outlier, but not that much of an outlier. But I also think too that the paranormal world and the academic world, and I think this is part of the academic world, has been like, oh, we can't really look at that. And, or the paranormal, we can't really give it, credence or credit. And I don't find that to be true. I think that we can have, just like, folks that are completely on the side of science feel like, oh, you can't have belief. And I think you can have both, right? Like we can all have these dualities, these, and also work within liminal spaces between our different, the different aspects of us and the things we hold dear and the things that we hold true, right? I am into science, by the way. Like I believe in science. I don't want to be like, they're like, oh, she's a science denier.
No,
I'm
no.
not. But
yeah.
I think that it's important to think about these things. And I think that, we can have our side of, being enthusiasts of the paranormal and investigators and being fascinated by those things. But we can also look at the way that the paranormal functions in the world and what it helps us untangle in ourselves, what it helps us deflect or reflect in ourselves, because it does a lot of that as well.
And, we really turned into a intellectual society and away from a spiritual society many years ago, which I really you're probably better at even explaining this, but I think the church, to keep people in line, took away their spirituality and inserted rules. And that's how that's how we keep everybody in line. But it's so interesting because I feel like, especially this year, 2023, which will go down so far as the worst year of my life. I just can't stand 2023. But we're watching everything break. I used to live next to a guy that was like the science biggest guru. I don't know. I'm not about school at all. You would know what he's called. Science dean of that department or whatever. And I would be like, so there's no UFOs. And he would say, no. And I would have to be like, really, there's nothing. And he's like, there is nothing in the sky that, like, he had to dig his heels in on that. And I don't feel like that's science. And I feel like those kind of walls, like there's no, like we just saw the UFO reveal has begun. But I think those walls are not good for anyone. So I think you don't have those walls, which is what's great, why you can dance between both worlds.
Well, and I agree with you. I don't think those walls are good for anyone, because the reality is none of us know all of it. We don't. And so when we like work in absolutes, we keep ourselves from learning new things. And I really want to always be seen as a lifelong learner. I just do. I want to read new books. I want to watch new documentaries. I want to listen to new podcasts. I want new music, right? I don't want to be the person who's like, my development stopped at this year and I will only listen to things from that year and beyond, or before. And for me, I think that there's talking about, the example you just used about UFOs, like, our universe is so vast and we're discovering new things every single day. And I also think, and I'm not the first person to say this by any means, but I think it's really, really arrogant of us to think that we're completely alone and that we are the end all be all. But I think a lot of that, that idea of we're the center of the universe, I think if you are focusing in United States, as you and I both live in, like America is very us centric.
Yes.
And it's as if like the rest of the world doesn't exist. And even if you just travel to another country, you very quickly become aware, like, oh, it's not the same everywhere.
And they're doing quite a few things better. They're doing something better.
Right? Like when you hear these, you hear in other countries where they're like, they, believe in this level of vacation for certain months of the year. Or they work to live. They don't live to work. And Americans are just like, what?
I know.
Huh?
I remember someone that I can't remember where they got hurt. It was a foreign country, and it was one where if somebody was really I want to say one of those Americans that would never leave the country. Oh my God, the doctors aren't going to be good, and it's going to they make you feel like you'd be in a hospital where there's roaches crawling up and down the wall. But it was like, no, they have real hospitals and real people, and because the person was on vacation, I think they broke their arm or something. They couldn't get the health care from that country, so they had to pay the full price, which was like $25. It was like it was some sort of we're doing everything wrong here in healthcare. That's all I can say.
Well, and the thing is too, is it's like, when you think about, like in that example of like, think about like, oh, this other country, the hospitals must be like this, their system of whatever, right? Even in the idea of like third world countries, we love in American culture to other people. We love to define ourselves by what we are not. And so people's value systems, right, their belief systems are sometimes, a lot of times they hold on to deeply because of fear. And I get that, right? You were mentioning about like the church trying to control, right? Mm-hmm. And if we can control people, if we can instill fear in them that if they go outside of what they know, then it's much easier to control folks. Like that's what institutions in some way or another do with their ideals, right? These are our ideals. And if you uphold them, you'll be good with the institution. And like in a very large and imagined way, America is its own like institution in those things. Yeah. And so we love to think about, well, it couldn't be as good as what we have here. There's no one that could be as good. And yet we constantly see examples of people doing it better. But that's where I also, thinking about other countries in the world, comparatively, I'm like, America is a real angry teenager.
Yes. Yes.
Like age-wise.
We're drunk
and they're
in
in
the
that
bar,
space. Like, I don't need you. I got this. I'll be fine on my own. And like, writing black poetry in their black diary, like very angry.
Yes.
And okay, great. But we're at a space. You're talking about everything breaking. We're coming up on that 250-year-ish mark where many democracies break down.
I think we're going to break down. I do. And, I got to throw this in real quick. A lot of people don't know. Other countries, there was a guy from New Zealand. Somebody asked this on TikTok, and it was brilliant, is what do you think of the United States? We are on many, many countries' do not visit list. Like they warn their people, and listen to the warnings. They're very, very good. The first one is the laws in every state are different. So you have to know that for different reasons. I don't know. I figured that was probably like a pot rule or something like that. The laws are different state to state. So you have to know where you are. The second one was if you get hurt and you got to go to the hospital, you're done. It's going to be so expensive. It's insane, which is true. If there's somebody out here with no health insurance from a different country. And the third was our mass shootings, which I think is that's kind of blown out of proportion. That's probably not going to happen. But I thought, nothing there is that far. We're the third world country no one should come to, I guess.
Well, and that's the thing, like you're like that point about the laws. So in my other work at a university, we travel for conferences for professional development, or I present at different conferences. And working in the state of California and working for the state of California, we are constantly given a no travel list of states we cannot go to because there are laws like transphobic laws, anti-LGBTQ laws, things that the state of California's values don't align with, we're not allowed to travel to. Karen, wow. I can't travel to over half of the states in my own country because they are going so far out to other people to be harmful towards people. And like, it's wild to think about. It is wild to think about the fact that I have to, and I was just submitting my travel request recently, I have to look at what state a conference is going to be in before I even think about submitting to present there, because if I'm not allowed to travel there, it won't be paid for.
And you obviously could go there on vacation if you wanted. You're saying for work,
Sure.
correct? Okay, I was like,
For
that's
work.
an even weirder rule.
But at the same time, it's like, because if it's a work thing, they're going to pay for stuff, which I love, right? Like, please pay for my hotel and my flight and my car and all that. But like over half of the states in my own country, because of the harmful laws that they have passed, not being inclusive, not welcoming people, we are not to travel to.
So I have troubles on both sides of that issue just because, and this is the thing, our country is splitting at a massive rate. Wouldn't your presence bring some light and some understanding of that issue? Like,
I would hope so.
Like, that's almost abandoning those people in those, you know what I mean? Am I making any sense?
No, you totally are. But I think also, too, we have to think about even the layers of like privilege in that, right? Because me going to that state for a conference for a certain professional group, it's not like I am seeing the people in that state that necessarily, like I might see a very small fraction of the people in that state because of even the privilege of being invited to present at an academic conference.
Got it. So now, and that's, yeah. So
there's layers to that even.
If someone was, everything is layers. You're right. Everything is layers, but I'm so like, I'm leaving society. I'm retiring from society because I'm so like, I can't, this split is killing me. Like, I feel like we're just going to destroy ourselves. But anyways, we got off on a weird tangent there, but that is interesting that even you are affected by those rules. Wow. Okay. So here's my question before the break.
Yes.
Because I love the way your podcast and this show was named Decoded, not Debunked, because debunked is like, that's where we get in the skeptic thing. When they say decoded, does that mean you like really dive into these topics and find out what's true and what or where that came from or urban legend and that kind of stuff?
I think we try to. I know for the TV show end of things, which I am separate from, but I enjoy it. And I support Jen, who is the main host, and she has a lot of great co-hosts on there. But I think we try to, but it's hard to do in a short TV amount of time.
Yeah.
But I think we are trying to absolutely, like, if any debunking is being done, it's on very obvious things, right? We want to make sure we're talking to credible people. We want to make sure that we're not putting more like false information out either on either side necessarily. But at the same time, having fun exploring and untangling things. I think that's part of what investigation should be about. Like, I don't ever expect to come out of investigating anything, researching anything, and knowing all the answers. If anything, it leads to more questions, right? And it leads to more wondering and more paths to go down.
Yes. And we're going to leave that right there and come right back and have a little story about the last time I investigated with Ryan. Okay, folks, we'll be right back.
MedicallySpeaking.com is a prophetic shop that focuses on your inner alchemical transmutation. And I needed an alchemical transmutation to say alchemical transmutation. See, Toria, you did it. When you're looking for activations to change your aura, wisdom and insight to heal your past, and alchemy to live your highest vibrancy, you will most certainly enjoy the array of offerings you will find at hermeticcallyspeaking.com. Created through the teaching of the Hermetics, Toria, who's been on my podcast many times, provides personalized guidance that caters a feast specifically from the higher realms to you. You'll leave each session feeling empowered and loved, having gained ancient knowledge for your soul's nourishment and growth. Believe me, I know. I've worked with Toria and she is terrific. Everything you need is within you. So come remember, activate, and expand your knowing at hermeticcallyspeaking.com.
Okay. So this is where it is kind of, things can get funny. Ryan and I were on an investigation, and I do love trinkets and apps or whatever in EMF stuff. I don't own really much of that, but I do enjoy playing with it. In fact, I can't remember the name of it, but I am a little fascinated by that thing that makes stick figures. You know what I mean?
Oh, the XLR camera.
Yes.
Or I'm saying that. Yes.
Yes, I think we're close. People will know. And it's I have seen it actually work quite well. It's one of those things where it's like I really don't know if I believe this or not, but I've seen it really work, and it was quite interesting. But we went on one, and everyone had their apps, and every single thing that showed up on the app was a spirit, and we were like, and then we did a podcast, and I didn't want to say that after on the podcast, and he was like, way too much. And I was like, all right, well, everyone's going to know. But that's not a useful investigation. It really is not, right?
Well, and I think that's the thing, right? I mean, I think about my paranormal investigation kit, and even though I will definitely record things digitally,
Are you an analog girl?
I'm an analog kind of person because they record things differently. So I have a tape recorder for those of you out there that remember tapes, right? But I have a tape recorder so that I can also record because the idea of magnetic versus digital, they record different ways. Mm-hmm. And since we don't truly know how people are coming over, or spirits or energy or whatever you want to call it is coming over, I think it's important to kind of cover different bases, right? And I know people that have those cameras and love them, and other people that I know who are like, oh, those cameras are BS. And then, some people are like, I totally love dowsing rods, and other people are like, I hate dowsing rods. I mean, everyone has their own tools of preference, right? And I like to try new things, see what things work and what don't work. And I think with the apps, what's hard is it's like we don't know what is generating that in the app. Mm-hmm. But I definitely have had some really interesting experiences, not even directly, but with guests on my Haunted OC tour of those like spirit box apps.
Yes.
Tying in directly to things that are about to be said or even are about to be said. Because it wasn't after it was said. It was like, so a great example of this. So let me fill folks in on like what I'm talking about. So I work, I run haunted historical tours. So ghost stories and good history of the Kellogg House at the Heritage Museum of Orange County. And it's not the Kellogg of gardening, or it's the Kellogg of gardening fame, not of cereal fame. That's a different Kellogg family.
Is this the house? I think I've been to this house. Does this have the doctor, the female doctor used to live? And
that is the Waffle House that we all investigated together.
Okay,
that is literally like 3 miles away from the Kellogg House.
Okay, waffles and Kellogg. Everything is breakfast oriented, though.
Yes, it's all, waffles, cereal, all these things. So the Waffle House where we investigated, right up the street, and I'm there a lot because of being tied to the Santa Ana Preservationist Society. I love that house as well. The Kellogg is also a Victorian house. It was built in 1898 by Hiram Clay Kellogg, H.C. Kellogg, as a wedding gift, quite a wedding gift, to his second wife, Helen Kellogg. And so this incredible house, it has a lot of like nautical themes to it. It really looks like a house you would have expected to see on the East Coast, not necessarily built in California. But Hiram loved sailing. He loved ships. And those who come on the tour it'll sink into them. They will really understand that by the end of the tour. And so, it is, Haunted OC does a lot of different types of tours. There is Old Town Fullerton, Old Town Orange. There is historic San Juan Capistrano. We've added Pasadena, Hollywood, and downtown Santa Ana. So we do all these tours. And most of those tours, the majority of those tours, are in outside areas. So you're walking around downtowns or old towns, historic parts of those cities, which are amazing. I am super fortunate because I am one of the few tours that actually goes inside a location. And so we spend a couple minutes on the museum ground because the Heritage Museum of Orange County is a hands-on learning museum for school-age children, but anyone can come, and they have all kinds of incredible events. Like just coming through spooky season, we've had tons of things happening with spooky season. I say at Haunted OC, every season is spooky season because we run tours all year long. So people, I think a lot of times are surprised, like, I can come tour with you in a March. And I was like, yes, you can come tour with me in a March or in July or in spooky season. And so people will spend a little bit of time on the grounds. We talk about a few other locations on the grounds, but we spend most of our time inside this gorgeous house from 1898. And a lot of my nerdy tendencies come out around this house. 1, the paranormal, 2, history, 3, architecture, because it is stunning. Like Hiram absolutely had such an incredible design eye. And the fact that he thought about these things in the late 1800s, well before other people or well before most other people had anything like this. Like this house has indoor plumbing. And I know some people might be like, whoop-de-doo, it has indoor plumbing. But the house being built in 1898, most people in the United States did not have indoor plumbing until the 1930s. And then if you lived in a really rural area, you didn't have indoor plumbing till the 1950s. Wow. So that gives you a little bit of context about how ahead of the game Hiram was in building this.
And real quick, where did he make his money? Mm-hmm. You said garden?
So if you are a gardener in modern day and you see the Kellogg striped bags, all of their gardening stuff comes with these striped bags and a little king on them. Okay. That is what the family does now. But how Hiram made his money, and he was still actually considered middle class. He was not considered like super wealthy. But if anyone knows anyone in the construction industry, you always know you have your inside people to help you cut costs. So this makes sense to me. But Hiram was actually the first civil engineer in all of Santa Ana. He then became the deputy county surveyor for Anaheim, just right next door. And so he was the civil engineer, the deputy county surveyor for Anaheim. And then he and his brothers, there was Kellogg Brothers Vineyards. And so they did vineyard planting in California. And that is what takes them into more of the gardening end of things. But Hiram was involved in things all up and down California, did a lot of work in San Francisco, and he also did a lot of work in Hawaii. And when people think about California areas like the city of Corona, Hiram designed the city of Corona.
Wow.
Elsinore, he designed the city of Elsinore. The roads that surround the house, even though they have been, many times repaved, he is the one that fought to get the roads paved in Santa Ana around the original location of the house, because on the museum grounds, it was moved there, only a few miles away, but it was moved there. But around the original location of the house, because Hiram was the first person in that area to own a car. So he's like, I'm going to get these roads paved. So he was very influential in Orange County history, local history. And his influence goes up and down the state, which is really impressive to think about, because you don't always think about like, oh, somebody had to design this city. Well, he designed these cities. Wow. And he designed this house, which again is stunning, and redesigned it twice. But I don't want to give that away. I want people to come on the tour about why he had to redesign the house. But one of the things that's really impressive, to go back to the spirit box story, is that there's a beautiful floor in the dining room. It's a stunning hand inlaid floor. And, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you didn't just go to the grocery store and get, floor wax. You had to boil wax on the stove and, dip a mop in and wax the floor that way. And so Hiram was doing this one day, and the wax boiled over and it caught on fire. And so Hiram tries to run out the back door of the house, and he slips and he falls in the hot fireworks.
Wow.
Face first. Now, Hiram, who is a very handsome man, tour guests joke all the time that I have a crush on Hiram. I think I kind of do. He was super handsome. But Hiram was okay. Like we've seen pictures of him years after the accident. His face seems to be all right.
He might have even looked better. Maybe he inadvertently gave himself a face peel.
Right? Like the first type of like paraffin wax peel, right? Like, I don't know, right? And so but it did end up making the local paper, right? So you can actually look up this article online. So as I'm telling, I haven't even gotten to that part of the story, and I see two guests, and I don't mind if people bring investigation equipment on the tours. It's a tour, it's not an investigation, so I want to put that out there to everyone. But I don't mind if people bring items on the tours as long as they don't interrupt other people or interrupt me.
Right.
So I see these two women in the corner, and I'm just starting to tell the story. I haven't even gotten to the heart of the story, and I see their eyes go really wide. And I make a note to myself, like, I will check with them on the break, because we take a little break between the first floor and the second floor. So then I finish telling that story, and I see their eyes get like extra wide. So we take a break, and I walk over to them, and I was like, so I noticed before I told that story, you two look surprised. And then after I told that story, you looked extra surprised. What's going on? And they said, well, we have a spirit box running. And the words that came up on that were burning flesh.
Ah.
And so when you finished that story, we were extra shocked. And I'm like, okay, all right. I was like, thanks a lot, Spirit Box, for giving away my the end of my story. But like burning flesh. Okay. That's a very, random thing to come up on that with the timing of everything.
Right. You're not getting that at Disneyland. You're getting it at Hiram's house.
Right. So it was it's things like that when I go, okay, that's interesting. Like we got that at that time. All right. Making a note, and guests love to tell me their stories when things happen. And I love that. And I make note of those things, because part of what I feel is really my responsibility is to care for the house. Because even though Hiram built this house, I would be remiss to not mention, if I didn't mention, that we don't refer to it as Hiram's house. We refer to it as Helen's house. Because Helen outlived Hiram, outlived a second husband, and that was her house till the end of her life. And so when people are like, why isn't it Hiram's house? I'm like, oh, this was Helen's house, everybody.
Yes. That's beautiful. And I have had a machine do that same thing in a prison, in a men's prison. And all three pieces of equipment went off, and the lights shut down and came off. And the thing said King, and we were in the cell where someone had murdered the warden, whose last name was King, and it was a capital K.
Oh, wow.
And I think, though, I'm sure you probably agree. Any smart spirit can manipulate anything.
Oh, yeah. And, it's always interesting to me when, we're talking about people being in their absolutes, when they get in their absolutes with something like that, like, oh, there's no way. And I'm like, but isn't it more fun to think that maybe it could?
Yes.
Can't we again have some whimsy in our lives to, enjoy these aspects of like what we're doing? And on top of that, like, it always cracks me up when people come onto an investigation and are not open to anything, or they're like, I want to believe everything. And I think we have to strike a balance, because I think it's important as investigators to debunk what we can, right? Like, because not everything's going to be a thing.
No. And at
the same time, like, again, I want to be open, but I want to be open in anything in my life. Like, that's not just my philosophy on, investigation, but I want to be open to all kinds of experiences.
I agree. And it's funny because you like that analog, which I believe that's because digital, I want to say analog is more consistent. Digital is a little bit chopped, right? When you really break it down. Is that your thinking?
It's like, because analog is continue as I understand it. And if you get a bunch of comments about like, she was wrong about how that works.
No.
Y'all, I am a humanities and social sciences first. So if you want to correct me, I'm totally for that. But analog is continuously recording versus digital begins recording when it picks up sounds. So it's kind of like those stop motion security cameras, like motion detected. It might not be recording up until that point. So you're not necessarily seeing what is coming before or necessarily what is coming after, but you're like recording the event versus analog that is perhaps is picking up all along that. And so I like to have both. I want to know both because when going back to that Waffle House investigation that you, Ryan, and I were on together with a bunch of other amazing people, like I was recording digitally on that and I got EVPs out of there. Mm-hmm. So, I trust that if folks are trying to come through or energies or whatever folks want to call it are trying to come through, they're going to come through.
Yes. And
that house, the Waffle House, I always have experiences in. It doesn't matter if I'm there for something paranormal or not.
Well, we had the wonderful in that house. We had it was a really great EVP, which was she slept on the second floor. So, folks, this was like a female doctor, like she was like the first in Orange County or something, right? So it's like an amazing story. Yeah. So she had a little phone that on the street, if you needed help in the middle of the night, you went to that little, what is it, speakerphone? Or what did they call it?
It was like a little, it almost looks like the small bell of like a Victrola. Like,
yes,
it's a little flared bell that you would go and speak into, and it traveled like through a tube, basically, and would wake her up.
And we said in the room, we came in and said, doctor, can you help me? And we must have shook up a residual in that because it came through that speaker. We recorded it as though that's what the doctor would have heard in her room to wake her up. Is someone said, doctor, can you help me? And it was it was really a great EVP. And it was so interesting because it was like double sourced. Like it was through that speaker. And then we were like, does that speaker even work? We don't even know if it works. But the voice came through and we got it. It was really, it was actually audible in the room. It wasn't only audible on the tape. And it's funny because I always was taught in the beginning, and I think sometimes people get a piece of equipment that is theirs. That is just the one that works for them. Mm-hmm. And I was always taught you're supposed to get the cheapest recorder, like the most flimsiest audio recorder because it picks up so many different sounds. And then later on, someone said to me, no, you need the Zoom recorder because it cuts out so much garbage. And I go with the Zoom because I can't hear anyways. And half of the EVPs, I'm sure I miss. Anyway, so on the Zoom, they are so clear if you get them on your Zoom recorder.
And so the EVP that I got from that, when we had broken into our like upstairs group and our downstairs group during that investigation, mm-hmm. I was sitting in that front parlor with one of the guests that we had on that investigation. And we were asking questions after we had done, like, Ryan and I had been sitting on that first floor with other folks on the investigation. And it seemed like we had been interacting with like a child spirit. During that investigation, my name was even said through a spirit box, which was random because Darcy is just not that common of a name. And we were getting a lot of interaction with the spirit that seemed to want to interact with females. Whenever men came by, they were not having it. And we checked all these things. We checked wiring. We checked, to make sure that we were getting as true as we could for what was going on. So after that, like, heavier part, when everyone was set to go on their own, I was sitting in the front parlor with this gentleman asking some of those same questions, like, what's your name? How old are you? And we had gotten through the spirit box before we went on our own. When we asked, how old are you? They had said 8. We'd gotten the answer 8. And so I asked that question again, and the EVP that I ended up getting from all those questions was like this tiny little child's voice saying 8.5, like that excited little like 8.5. And it was just so sweet. And so, you know, the little ones, like that's the one thing that in that house when I'm there, I feel like I'm interacting with little ones all the time, or maybe the same little one. I don't know. But the waffle is also part of the haunted OC tours with downtown Santa Ana, because Tina, who leads that tour, Tina is the president of the Santa Ana Preservationist Society. And so she will finish her tour and allow folks to go into the waffle a little bit, not to the level that we had access to it. But you can rent the waffle for more investigations, just like you can rent the Kellogg for investigations as well.
Oh, I love that. Okay, hey, let's take a break and come right back. We're going to pick this up right here.
Hey, everybody, how's that spiritual awakening going? I know. Don't worry, help is here. HighlySpiritualPerson.com is a haven for spiritual misfits and empaths navigating spirituality and mental health. My friend Camille has a plethora of resources on her site to help you on your spiritual journey, even if you're just starting out. It includes individual and collective Reiki sessions, personalized guided meditations, sleep affirmation tracks, and so much more. Camille has so much to offer. She's going to be on my podcast in December. I can't wait to talk to her. Her blog posts and podcast episodes explore spirituality and are great for folks carving out their own path. She has written 2 easy-to-follow guidebooks, one on breathwork, and the newest book is called Manifestation is Easy, and it features 22 step-by-step manifestation techniques, as well as tips and advice on how to overcome the most common blocks and start changing your reality. Go to HighlySpiritualPerson.com. I promise you, you will get lost in how much information is in there. It's one of my favorite rabbit holes.
You know what else I love about, like, especially that waffle one? There's nothing nefarious. It's just fun. It's whimsy, shall we say.
Yeah. And, you know, I feel the same way about the Kellogg. It's something that people get nervous about. So I will have we have a range of people that come on the tour. And there's definitely the people who are the paranormal enthusiasts who are like, I am here for the ghost stories, which I love. I have the people who are often like, as I jokingly will say, like drug along to this tour. And I'm like, look, if I don't get you with the ghost stories, maybe I'll get you with the history. And if I don't get you the history, maybe I'll get you with the architecture. But I also pride myself on being a good storyteller. I want to make it engaging and fun. And I recently learned this term. This is not my term, but there's this incredible environmental educator named Griff Griffiths, who works for this organization called Redwoods Rising that's trying to repopulate redwoods in Northern California, like doing important environmental work. And he calls himself an edutainer. And I'm like, yes, that's me. I'm an edutainer. And so, like, I think there's a few reasons people don't engage with history, in my opinion. One, people have made it boring. Like, that's flat out. People have made history boring. And I don't think history needs to be boring. Right. Two, the way that history for so long has been taught in the U.S. is what we call top-down history. The winners and then everybody else.
Yes.
Or the great figures in that and everybody else. Versus what we do in American studies is bottom-up. So everyone included, and then moving into these other spaces, like from the bottom on up. And so thinking about how much people of color have not been represented other than a footnote.
Yes.
Right. And so it's like when I work with students of color, especially, I'm like, yeah, why are you going to be excited about history when you never see yourself represented in it?
You know what?
Like, so I get that.
There's also something that is, I don't know, I would say it's new to me, and Bill Maher covered it, and it's called presentism. Do you know this word?
I think I do. I want to hear you explain it and see if I'm on the same track with you.
Okay. So presentism a simple example, which I hope I'm not going to get political or throw anybody off here because it's just an example. Dave Chappelle always said the gay community should have helped out the black community. And that is known as presentism, in that at that time, when the gay community was fighting for their rights, they were fighting for their lives. So he's seeing that community as though they had the rights they have now. And that's called presentism. It's like I did a thing on women, on women's, rights, like how we came through and, where we've come from the 60s, where people could just have their wives committed. And people were like, yeah, no, but you didn't help out so-and-so, which it's like, that's not an untrue statement, but women didn't have rights. You're assuming that my mother couldn't drive the car. Do you know what I mean? So when they present history with this, like I swear to God, sometimes in those joke things, you'll see someone go, well, why didn't black people just not be slaves? And it's like, that's presentism. That they didn't, we weren't where we, you know what I mean? Am I making any sense?
Yeah, no, that's, it's people not understanding historical context.
Yes.
And I say all the time, historical context is everything, right? Like you're talking about, part of what I teach at the university is women's history. Mm-hmm. And, folks don't realize that like a woman could not get a credit card on her own until the 1970s.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's in my lifetime. That's in your lifetime.
Yep.
And so when we look at these things, and I've heard those kinds of arguments around different things, right? And so when we look at those kinds of arguments in that present tense of not understanding historical context, not understanding what people had and what people didn't have, or what people could do without losing their lives. Mm-hmm. It is horrifying to me that in our country that certain states are now teaching that enslavement had benefits to Black folks and African. Like what? Yeah. What century are we living in? Right?
Yeah.
And when we look at these, like what we call the silences in history, the silences are where people have either been omitted on purpose or by accident. And so we don't have the full story. Mm-hmm. And it's the folks that don't want to fill in those silences to be like, when we hear it a lot in women's history, but it's in all people's history. Right. Like we were there too. Women were there too. Black folks were there too. Latinx folks were there too. Like these different folks were there too. And it's something I'm constantly giving context to with my students. Because like, let's say if I'm talking around very like heteronormative concepts of,
Oops. I'm going to hold on. Okay, folks, I'm going to we paused it. The universe of the web didn't like us. You continue, Darcy.
So like one of the things I'm constantly giving students context for is, for an example, like I will be talking to them about heteronormative gender roles in marriages in colonial times. But I'll say to them, look, folks, I'm not saying folks in the LGBTQIA plus community didn't exist then. But when we're talking about this space in history, these are examples that we're drawing from, and we're talking about the major culture at that time, the major societal moves of that time. So helping them understand that we acknowledge that other people were there, but we didn't always have the same language. Like that's the thing too that kills me, is people don't understand how language changes. And they're like, it's always been that way. I'm like, no, it's not. There are words today that did not exist 10 years ago.
Right.
And so like that context is so important in things.
Yeah.
And so I have the folks that so going back to why I originally went on, again, so many paths. And I appreciate you, Karen, for letting me go. I just get excited about this stuff. It's like, so I have the people that are there for the ghost stories. I have the people that are reluctantly there, but I feel I can draw them in. And I have the people that are there because they think it'll be fun. Like those, I would say, are the three kind of major types of folks. But again, trying to bring along folks into the Kellogg. And, I get asked all the time because I tell people, I'm like, I'm in this house many times a month. Like, I get ready in this house because I wear on the tour, as you've seen in my TikTok videos, photos from Twitter and Instagram, like I'm in full Victorian mourning for this tour. And people all the time are like, can't believe they make you wear that. I was like, oh, no. I chose this. I was like, can I wear a Victorian dress? And they're like, absolutely. And me being also part of my academic arena of study, my very focused area is death, dying, and grief in American culture. So if I'm going to talk about Victorian times, I'm absolutely going to talk about Victorian death culture because it's a huge thing. And so I'm in full Victorian mourning. So I get dressed in the house. And during that time, I talk to Helen a lot. I always greet Helen when I go in the house. I say goodbye to Helen when I leave, and I ask all of the guests to do the same. Because Helen has definitely gone through a lot of times of her being, like, I think mistreated because of some things that, some stories that are told about her, and I think disregarded. And so one of the things I really stress on the tour is I was like, this is not my house. This is not the museum's house. This is Helen's house.
I love that.
And we're guests in her house. And I try and think about, I've used the term several times, and I continue to use the term when I talk to folks about like the idea of broast hunting, about like walking into a space and like come at me, ghost, right? Like, and I have to be aware of like what the cultural norms would be of somebody coming into this house. And I also think about if in like, I put it back on myself. So if in, Helen has been gone since 1963 is when she left, as far as her mortal form.
Not that long ago.
So not that long ago, but I think about the fact that if, 60 years later, people were trudging through my house after I died and telling stories, like the worst stories about me, I'd probably be feisty about it too. And so I think it's really important. And I think we have a lot of, I am all for paranormal history and paranormal tourism. I think it's great, but I also think we have a responsibility to do good history in that. And be really aware of the power dynamics, and the power dynamics, not just of like the fact that I get to, as a person in modern day, get to come tell these stories, but also even in the language we use. So like when I'm on the tour, we go into what is referred to most commonly as the master bedroom. And I don't refer to it as the master bedroom. I refer to it as the principal or primary bedroom, because master bedroom is actually tied to enslavement.
And is that actually it's in both. It's in African Americans and women, isn't it? Kind of, or no?
Oh, I mean, women, there are definitely there's feminist theory and thought out there feeling that women were the first slaves before we ever stole anyone from their other countries. And we're both fronts, and the intersectionality of those fronts are still fighting for equality. We live in a country where, depending on where you travel to, if something happens to you, may or may not be able to get reproductive care, right? Like that's,
and this is a really weird one, but and this is really, I am amazed that men are infuriated. I didn't even see the Barbie movie, but I guess the thing is, Ken is the regular role in all films that women are. When you see all those action movies and women are just in the background, or they don't have anything to do except stand there and be pretty, and men are enraged that that's what Ken was in this movie. And I find that fascinating.
Well, toxic masculinity, right? The patriarchy is strong.
It's white toxic masculinity.
For sure. Yes. Huh? Oh, what did you say?
I said they are white knuckling it for sure right now. They're just not letting go. They're just not going to give in.
Well, and, we were talking about earlier, like the idea of the, democracy breaking down after 250 years. And my hope in that is that it breaks down and we become better, right? We we actually, want to be inclusive. We want to be welcoming. I'm aware of how I present. Like I'm a white lady. And like when I meet with students, like I'm a white lady in a position of power. And I don't want anyone to think I'm not for them. Like I don't want anyone to be afraid of me. Like I never want anyone to be afraid of me. But I think that it's hard to know because we used to be able to, like, you and I both have come up in times where we were able to talk about things and we were able to be on different sides of things and have different views and disagree. And that is me in no way giving any,
it wasn't excusing
leeway to the isms or the obias, because I'm not for that. But like this idea that we could have differences of opinions and talk to each other. And it's not that way. And I think that's part of what continues to divide us.
I agree. And also, we have stepped into this all bad or all good.
Oh, yeah.
And no gray. And that's and also, just a weird thing that I find interesting is, we can rip on. So, obviously reading tarot and stuff, you're working with people's trauma. And when they, of course, I love Carolyn Miss says how there was no dysfunctional family until TV and My Three Sons started. And then everybody was like, well, how come I didn't get that parent or something like that? But, and just on the same feminist route, our mothers did the best they could. They may have been very passive aggressive because that was the only power they had. So I always feel like we're always looking back and going, you should have, or I'm not talking to you because, and I agree with you. I think you and I are the first generation that at least now can be like, fuck that. I'm not doing that. You know what I mean? Like my mom couldn't do that.
Well, and I think too, like, this is where people have to understand that the concept of femme couvert, that means covered woman in French, was very real for a long time in our country. So a woman did not have rights to own property. A woman did not have rights, legal rights. Like if a woman got into trouble, her husband would be the one punished for it. Like she wouldn't even be the one brought to trial. It would be him because she was under him. She was covered by him. And so when we think about these things, like, again, we can look back and say, oh, it should have been. It should have been. It should have been.
Right.
But then there's the reality of how it was.
Yes.
And, this is one of the things that is very interesting when we look at like gender roles, for example. There's a great book called A Midwive's Tale, and it is about this midwife in the late 1700s, early 1800s named Martha Ballard. And it's her diary, essentially. And this history professor, Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, Dr. Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, a lot of people had gotten this diary. They didn't know what to do with it, Karen. They were just like, it's her diary. And Ulrich comes along and realizes that what we're actually seeing in this diary is a couple things. One, we're seeing a women's economy that people did not really understand existed during that time. And then we're also seeing how midwives could trace disease in their areas. And we're also seeing the difference between midwifery and the rise of the medical doctor and the medical expert. So Martha Ballard, some quick Martha Ballard stats, talking about like powerful women in history, right? She delivered over 800 babies during her time as a midwife. Over 800 babies, and she never lost a child during the birthing process.
Wow.
Never. That's a lot, right? She was a nurse. She was a pharmacist. She did all these things, but she also taught young women in her area how to weave and to weave flax. And you would see in this diary, she had to cross the river. And when you look at the river she was crossing, we're not talking about a little stream you might find on your gentle hike. We're talking about a river that froze over in the winter, that could be very harsh and very rough. And here she is in layers of clothing, like crossing this to go tend to her patients.
Wow.
And what Ulrich puts together about this women's economy is that while men were in what we call the public sphere, out like having these jobs outside of the home, that during that time, the homes could not have truly survived and existed without this women's economy. The money and the goods that Martha brought in as a midwife and a teacher of women how to weave, they would not have survived. They would not have survived. And so you see that in the diary, especially when her husband Ephraim, towards the end of the diary, spoiler alert, everyone, for a diary from the 1700s, but Ephraim goes to debtor's prison and she has to keep, and he's in debtor's prison for like 18 months. And he has to keep, he's just sitting in debtor's prison, like hanging out, which was very like, you just basically sat in a house to do your time. And then she is trying to keep the homestead alive and functioning. And I think if it had happened the other way around, he would have not been able to keep the farm.
Wow. Yeah.
He would not have been able to keep the house. And so Martha was crucial in this women's economy. So when this idea, I think that people have in more modern day that like, well, women were always in the home and they didn't really enter the workforce until World War II is so not true.
Yeah.
Because the women's economy was this whole other economy that was helping keep households alive. And even then, when we're looking at like how things have shifted, you see through this diary that premarital sex was happening and nobody was having a thing about it. But if you had sex and then you got pregnant, you were expected to get married because that was like, you should do that. But no one was sitting there going like, can't believe they had premarital sex. Like they trusted that was going on. And marriage would like, okay, we're going to get married now. And it was really it wasn't a religious thing necessarily. Not that Martha wasn't religious, but like, it was a way to keep households together and surviving and moving forward.
You know, I read somewhere there was a book that went on literally or a study that went on from the beginning of the century to now. And what they found is people were always the same. There was always premarital sex. There was always swearing. There was always, I don't know, drug use. There was always, sex clubs or weird, whatever. And it's like, people are just people. None of that stuff is new to us. Like we think we've created it. That was always there. And I think that's really interesting. But yes. Oh my God, Darcy. Miss Darcy, it is so great talking to you again.
It's so great talking to you. I know we went all over the place, but
that's all right.
This is that academic and paranormal brain coming together.
And then we went from our democracy crumbling to feminism to the Barbie movie. So that's a good podcast.
You know, like if you want it all, come to Paranormal Karen.
That is correct. Tell everyone where they can find you, my friend.
So if folks want to come on a haunted historical tour, go to hauntedOC.com. Under Ghost Walks, I host the one that is entitled The Kellogg House. But all of the Haunted OC Ghost Walks are fantastic and absolutely worth your time. If you want to find me on the socials, on Instagram and Twitter, I'm at Darcy Staniforth, DarcyStaniforth. And on TikTok, I am Miss Darcy Staniforth. But it's the same picture for all of them. So just look for my picture. Like if you're on one, look for it on the others. But that's where folks can find me. And the Mysteries Decoded podcast, that whole season we did is out now on any place you get your podcast. Look for the all-seeing eye with the little microphone for the Mysteries Decoded podcast.
Oh my God. All right. And I can't wait when I come back to California. I hope that if there is another investigation of the Kellogg house, I would love to come.
Oh, we're going to I can't wait for you to come back to California because we're going to do some more investigating, my friend.
Me neither. Thank you so much, Darcy. And thank you, everyone, for listening. No podcast next week. It's Thanksgiving. Thanks to Micah Uno Rising Media. Happy holidays.
Paranormal Karen. She's a spooky kind of queen. Paranormal Karen. She's an angel without wings. Comedian, ghost hunter, conscious exploring.
Paranormal Karen.